Okay, so this is going to be our lecture on disadvantages. So we have talked about in previous classes the aft burdens, the aft case, and we're going to be transitioning to sort of more the PF terms, the neg case or neg contentions or disadvantages. So basic overview of things we're going to cover today. We'll talk about some basic core PF assumptions for those of you who've done PF. We'll talk about the components of a disad. We're going to talk about offense versus defense. We're going to talk about uniqueness and the importance of uniqueness. We'll talk about impact calculus. We'll talk about some theory, some double turns. I deleted the politics slides. We will not get to those. So let's go ahead and begin. Real quick, so if you did PF, some of these things you might know, and we'll have a little bit more uh, advanced spins on them, but you should be able to know uniqueness, link, internal link, and impact, and we talked about that when diagnosing aft cases, right? You were able to figure that out on the AF 1AC. You should know basic impact calculus, and we'll talk about that some more. You should know, remember the difference between offense and defense, and we'll go through that in detail today. Also, you should remember, also from previous classes, learning what an argument extension card comparison is. Those are also core concepts that are used. Flowing line by line as well, things that we're slowly getting better on the more we practice in the class, but that come from sort of PF land for you all. Some basic background. What are the components of a disadvantage? So a disadvantage could also be called a a disad. Those are usually the three types of terms people use. In PF terms, they're basically a negative contention. 99% of the time, they're offense. And we'll talk about the difference between offense and defense in a second. From the larger schema of things, a disadvantage is usually the thing that goes with the status quo. So the status quo is a Latin term that means how things are right now. And so the plan is a deviation from the status quo. We should keep everything how it is except for this one change. And that's our plan to do this one thing. And the negative says, I don't want to do that one thing. I like how things are right now. How things right now are the status quo. And if we do that one thing, something bad is going to happen. That is a disadvantage. They could also be with the counter plan, and they could be paired. Instead of doing your one thing you want to do and cause that disadvantage, we should do the one thing she wants to do as a counter plan and avoid that disadvantage. And so that we'll talk about in a later lecture about counter plans before St. Mark's because it is needed, but it'll probably be after Marist. So let's go ahead and start with some basic structure. And so there's usually four parts to every disadvantage or disad in the 1NC. There's uniqueness, how things are right now. They're okay, we're surviving. A link, the plan does X. An internal link, X goes to Y, to Z. And then the impact, boom, bad stuff happens. In policy debate, it usually goes to math, death, billions and billions of people dying, extinction, that type of thing.
Okay, so this is an insert. I screwed something up, so gotta kind of just clean it all up. I've picked two different subjects. Later on, you'll hear me refer to math. That just means you can kind of take that and apply it to either the advantage or the disadvantage. Just kind of make sure you clean up the terminology. So the example we're going to talk about is the study DA. The study DA, as a quick background, I need one, test dummy student. So this class, we're going with fictional Sophia. Sophia, the issue is she's not staying up right now. She's not going to finish the English paper that's due tomorrow morning. Going to get a bad English grade, and then bad stuff happens. So the plan is to stay up all night, work very studious, get that English paper done, and do well in the English class. So for a disadvantage structure, it might go as follows. Uniqueness, the science grade for Sophia is fine. The link, by staying up all night, she's of course very, very tired in the morning. The internal link, being tired means that science pop quiz that pops up she doesn't know about, she's going to bomb. Worse science grade might mean a worse STEM GPA. Worse STEM GPA might mean worse STEM college. Oh no, now we get into impact land. A worse STEM college might mean you have a worse life, and then a worse life means more suffering, early death, longer hours, all that type of stuff. And so the traditional disad structure should make sense. It's like an advantage, so opposite advantage, disadvantage has the same sort of components. And so we have a science pop quiz DA that we're talking about here.
From there, worst college means you might not have a good life. So now we're in the impact world, right? You don't get to have that job, the money, the security, all that stuff. And if you don't have a great life, probably you're not very happy, right? And there's some suffering from there, and that's your end terminal impact to that. Does everyone kind of see the basic DISAD structure from link to internal link to impact, right? Based on our hypothetical study DA. And so let's add a few twists to that to make this a little bit more advanced. First of all, though, let's talk about offense and defense. Very, very important. So offense is basically a negative or pro contention. Those of you that took middle school intro, what is a neutral card? Melanie, you took middle school intro. What do you remember from that? It doesn't have any effect. So if we had choices, X leads to A or X leads to the opposite of A, neutral would be no effect. It doesn't lead to either A or not A. And so let me give you an example on that. If we went back to our basic link chain that staying up all night improves your math score, offense could be actually, if she stays up all night, we're sleep deprived, and is the math score going to go up or down? No, you show up all frazzled, maybe the math score actually gets worse, right? And so that would be an offensive argument in response to it. A defensive argument in response to it is, math is something that you can't really cram for 30 seconds before. You got to really learn, and she has missed the last month of class, and so there's nothing that she's going to do that's going to improve that math score. Does everyone see how that would be defense? Yes. Cool. So being able to distinguish between offense, which is this whole bad and good section, versus neutral, which is the defense section, is super, super important in policy debate, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. Let me give you some basic examples and terminology. So if the negative argument has a link, internal links 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and then finally an impact, the affirmative offensive response is called a turn. They're turning it around against you. And so a link, the corresponding to that is a link turn. An internal link, the corresponding to that is an internal link turn, and you can have a lot of those. An impact, the corresponding to that is an impact turn. Vice versa, you can put defensive responses. Now, PFers like to say delink, but that's silly. It is not a verb. So it's no link, or no internal link, or no impact. Does everyone see the terminology to distinguish between offense and defense? Cool. Not super complicated yet. Let's now start to add a little bit more complications. So uniqueness. Super, 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 super important in policy debates. Far less important in PF, and most PFers know it's important, they just can't really explain how and kind of fake it. So in policy, uniqueness disproves the validity of the argument. A common phrase you're going to hear that is something to memorize. When you have a link versus a link turn, uniqueness determines who wins. Uniqueness is the tiebreaker. So if my setup was staying up all night is key to pass the math class versus the turn, staying up all night dooms your math score, right? And Sophia, if you are already going to get a bad math score right now, is there any chance, do we care if you stay up all night and get a worse math score? No, because your parent's going to disown you one way or another, right? So there's only a chance staying up is actually going to improve the math score because we're controlling uniqueness. The math score is terrible right now. Vice versa, if your math score is super, super high right now, do you really need to stay up to make it go from a 99 to a 99.5? No. Instead, there's only a risk by staying up. You're going to bomb the test, get a 40, and now your grade goes from that 99.5 to a 91. And so uniqueness, super, super important. Whoever's controlling the direction of uniqueness ultimately controls who's winning link versus link turn. Let's make it even more advanced. And so here's where it's a little bit different from a jump from novice to JV, or honestly, this is from low-level varsity to high-level varsity. A lot of you all have been taught there's only one uniqueness on a DISAD. It's the very first argument. Things okay now. It's usually impact uniqueness. In reality, every single step of this chain, link, internal link, all the way to impact, each step has uniqueness components that can be indicted by the other team. So, for example,
Okay, another quick insert. So our uniqueness for our updated example, remember the original link chain, if you stay up, you're tired, hurt your quiz, all that stuff. Later on, you can substitute math. But for the original link, staying up means you're tired. Two fundamental uniqueness assumptions here. One, that you're actually going to sleep right now. So your decision to stay up actually will be very different from sleeping right now, that you haven't already naturally wired till 2 a.m. You're going to stay up late no matter what, playing video games. And so it's a choice between video games or studying for that English paper. Vice versa, the second level of it, the tired element, the assumption is that if you go to sleep right now, you'll wake up refreshed. But what if you sleep terribly, bad nightmares, you're freaking out about life, your scores, your tests, all that stuff, and you're going to wake up tired no matter what. And so if that's the case, then it would be fundamentally non-unique. Or even if you get sleep, you're so far behind in sleep, it's not going to be enough, and you're still going to wake up exhausted. And so that's the second sort of level of uniqueness.
so that's the uniqueness for the first step. From there, staying up actually helps you get a better math score. The fundamental uniqueness there is that, and the reverse of that, if she doesn't stay up, her math score goes down. The uniqueness of that is her math is good right now. Right? Vice versa, if she doesn't have a good math score, her GPA gets tanked. The uniqueness is that her GPA is good right now. And the setup there, if she doesn't have a good GPA, she goes to a bad college. What if her parents are already best friends with the dean of Harvard? Right? Then she's always going to, the assumption is that if she's always going to get to Harvard no matter what, then it doesn't really matter. Vice versa, getting into a college leads to a good life. The assumption is that going to have a good life because she goes to a good college. But if unbeknownst to Sophia, some sort of terminal illness is going to come strick her when she's 23 and she's going to die from genetics, then it really doesn't matter whether she goes to that great college or not, right? Because her life is limited. Or finally, the happiness part, right? The assumption is if she doesn't have that good life, she's going to have terrible happiness. But what if Sophia finds happiness on the inside and not outside externally? And she finds, as long as I find that person for me, I will be happy, and she's going to find that person. And so each levels of this link chain has implicit uniqueness to it that can be answered by the other team with a non-unique. So one side will say uniqueness, the other side will say it's non-unique. Does everyone see how uniqueness is a little bit more complicated? Cool. Other sort of advanced tips and tricks with disadvantages. Dates usually matter a lot, especially for uniqueness. If we're back to the example of math score is uniqueness is high right now, if one side says my math score is super high right now, here's my screenshot from Plus Portals from yesterday, versus the other side that says your math is totally tanked, here's a screenshot from you in 7th grade, which one matters? The more recent one? Probably. However, one key thing to think about, and this is a big difference between policy and PF, PFers love to over-emphasize on dates that don't really matter. Your evidence is from 2005. My evidence is from 2006. Thus, you should vote for me because my evidence is more recent and up to date. Is it really recent? Both of you are reading 20-year-old evidence. So does it really matter that 1 year? Probably not. And so anytime you want to make a card comparison based on recency, my evidence is new, yours is old, you must point to one thing that has changed since their evidence has come about that then changes the logic or the story to make yours right. So for example, in the math example, maybe the math class got harder, the teacher got worse, right? Something like that could have happened. Or vice versa, what will happen a lot is people will say the economy is tanked, But if their evidence is old and there's been stimulus or other things done by the government to boost the economy since then, interest rate cuts, things like that, maybe it answers and says, actually, the economy's doing good now. And so dates matter a bunch, but you must tell me what happened and why. Linear arguments don't really have uniqueness as much. So this matters a lot less in policy debate because the impacts aren't linear, they're a brink. We talked about this, I think, last class. If there's a brink, it's something you cross over and get to that impact. If it's linear, each step matters. And so a common linear impact might be like racism. If Sodvik was, never happened, but say someone said, Sodvik, you're being racist, right? Could Sodvik get up his response and be like, who cares if I'm racist? Taylor's racist too. Is that really a good response? Is that a defense? Or does each degree of racism matter? And you could be like, who cares if Taylor's racist? You're also racist, reject you. And so linearly, adding each degree of racism is something that is unique. And so you cannot just blanketly respond with, who cares if I'm being racist? There are other racist people out there too. Or there will always be a racist, thus I can be racist. And so certain things like that are more linear contentions, uniqueness matters far, far less. But in policy debate, there's not really many linear contentions. They usually come out in critiques, and we'll talk about that in a long time from now. Uniqueness needs to be conclusive. This will happen usually in politics, but it could happen for anything, your strategic stability, all that stuff. And so what you'll usually see in politics, which is based on a bill in Congress passing, there's a bill that will pass. Instead, we do the plan that takes all the time, energy, focus, and so now we can't get that bill passed. And that bill would have, done this thing which is super good, fed school children everywhere, right? Uniqueness, that first card, the assumption is the bill's going to pass right now. But you need to know the difference between a modal verb, what modal verbs are. So will pass versus should pass versus could pass. Does anyone want to take a stab on the difference between those three? Rishi. Give me a percentage with possibility. Could pass is 50%? You could become president, thus 50% chance Rishi's president? There's no set number, but it could be 1% could be could, right? There's a chance. Keep going. Yeah, it's more of like a moral obligation, not probability. Like, I deserve to be president. I should be president. Doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. What about would? Or will? Yeah, so will, give me a percentage. 100, yeah. A lot of times, if it's like an election or a snapshot, it might be like 51%, getting over that critical threshold, more likely to pass than not. But uniqueness evidence needs to be in that level of would. A lot of debaters will highlight a card. The card says could. They unhighlight the word could and say, it's going to pass. It's going to happen. When in reality, the author, by saying could, is just saying there's that 1% chance, which is very low. Does everyone kind of got the difference there? So a big difference between there could be a war between the US and Russia, and there will be a war by Christmas between the US and Russia. And looking at that evidence is critical. Snapshot uniqueness usually only matters for like elections-based disads, and so we're not going to worry too much about that. Let's talk about impact calculus. So impact calculus was super, super, super important. A lot of wins will be won and lost on impact calculus. This was the same in PF. It's the same in policy. And so the basic structure, if you are negative, is impact calculus starts in the negative block. If you are affirmative, impact calculus starts in the 1AR. In the negative block, for whatever DA you're going for, so if you're a 2NC going for strategic stability or a 1NR going for strategic stability, at the very top of the DA, you have something called an overview, and this is more of a norm. and you're going to put your impact calculus at the top. And so you have some white space at the top, you write your impact calculus, and then after that you start doing the line by line. They say 1 response, they say 2 response, they say 3 response in according. There are only 4 types of impact calculus. And so if you learn all 4 types of impact calculus, it carries over for life. So you could be fighting with your future husband about, do we go out to eat dinner or cook at home? This type of impact calculus still plays into that role. So the ones to think about: 1, magnitude. Whose impact is bigger? Bigger usually in questions of scope or severity. So there's a difference between an impact that kills 1 life versus an impact that kills 5 billion lives, right? You'd probably much rather save 5 billion than 1 random person, assuming the person's not yourself, right? See how selfish we are? Second level, that severity. Even if you have the same number, 5 billion, if 5 billion people are getting a paper cut versus the other 5 billion are burning themselves alive, there's a huge difference in pain there, and you would say the 5 billion burning themselves alive would be a bigger impact. Probability. So here's a slight difference from PF. And PFers love to think probability is like the whole contention. So if I'm going for a no link or an alt cause or something on the link and internal link level, that's probability. And you, judge, can vote on probability because I've won defense. Terrible calculus. Probability is only from the impact level. Why is your impact more probable? So if your impact is Russia will invade by Christmas, you want to talk about why that invasion is going to be more likely, not the first few steps, the internal links that got us that invasion are more likely. So comparing, for example, the probability that global warming causes mass wars for resource conflicts versus the probability that China invades Taiwan because they fear a loss in soft power, that's 2 probability comparisons. And you could talk about which is more probable. Basic thing they teach you in law school from torts, that's called learned hand formula. It's pretty obvious. You all probably already use this in your everyday life. Normal impact calculus, probability times quantity equal impact. Is everyone kind of used to that, right? So expected value is the math term for those of you that have used it. And so, for example, if the probability is 10%, the overall cost or impact is $100, then the expected value is what? $10. And that's an easy way to kind of do those 2 maths together to see who actually outweighs. However, there's a few other twists as well that matter for impact calculus. One is time frame. So time frame is which one comes first. So if I had 2 examples, if we had, 1 billion people dying tomorrow versus 1 billion people dying 100 years from now, you would probably want to save the 1 billion people dying tomorrow. But there are kind of 2 reasons why. Does anyone want to take a shot on what one of those reasons might be? Amshu. Yes, we've circularly restated the sentence. Do we have a because statement why it might come first? No worries. Adifi? We'll go to Izzy after that. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, so that's called intervening actors. And the argument is that, the longer away your impact is in the future, you can't predict the future with 100% certainty. And so things can always change. When I was young, I thought I'd be president of the United States, and bam, here I am, teacher. And so moral of the story is things change over time. And you might have an impact that seems guaranteed 100 years from now, but there could be new technology. Russia might not even exist. Putin might die, might be replaced with a democracy, all sorts of stuff, right? And so the longer their impact is, inherently the less probable it is. There is one other reason why we care about time frame. Izzy, do you want to try this one, or did Aditi get yours? Aditi got it. No worries. The other one's a little bit more simple. Oh, go ahead, Amshu. No, not quite, not quite. We haven't said word causation yet, right? So the answer to this one's simple, right? So you would rather, if I had to say, you get the favorite thing you want to do in the world, say it's eat ice cream, watch a movie, go to outside concerts with friends, something like that. You can do more of them with more time. And so maybe I would rather have those extra 99 years so I have more time to pet my cat. And so that's the other simple reason why we care about time frame. It's another day worth living. Cool. Causation. This is ultimately the most important one. It is finally PF is learning it's super important in PF. In policy, it's absolutely essential. And so this also ultimately gets called DA turns case turns DA, or case contains DA. Those will be the terms you'll hear. But it also ultimately means the following. If I have two impacts, A and B, A could be like global warming. The B impact could be COVID 2.0, global pandemics. Causation is one causes the other. And so, for example, if I said warming causes diseases, can anyone give me a because statement for that? Go ahead, Taylor. Yeah, so this came from your cases, the science diplomacy stuff, for those of you that did it. But yes, as there's global warming, we have all these diseases from millions of years ago that might get released. Maybe the human body isn't able to confront them yet, and then thus maybe mass pandemics come because of it. And so that would be one good warrant on why that is the case. And so causation is super important because let's say Team B says, my impact is 1 billion people. Pretty big, right? Team A, their impact is only 10 people. So it seems like B is winning, right? However, if you have causation, if warming not only kills 10 people, but it also causes disease, then your impact is now what? 1 point whatever 1 billion. You've captured all of their impacts plus added your own. So no matter how much the affirmative or the other team talks about why their impact is bigger or how more probable their impact is, it doesn't matter, and even if your impact causes theirs. And so that's why causation is super important, is it captures magnitude, it captures probability. So last big sort of advanced trick. Because causation is super important, you'll see both ways. One side says warming leads to disease. The other side says, no, 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 disease leads to warming. Can anyone give me a because statement why disease might lead to warming? This is a little bit harder. No creativity amongst the group? We'll go with Vendot. If you're trying to fight a deadly disease, you're what? Because? There you go. You've spent all of your money saying scientists solve this problem. They have less time, research, energy to spend on warming. Very easy. Or vice versa. Disease wrecks the economy. When the economy goes down, people care less about clean energy. Burn, baby, burn becomes the theme. And then we bump up coal pollution. All those, both good warrants. And so what happens when both teams have causation to each other? How do we break this tie? It can't be magnitude because they both have the same impacts now. It's not going to be, can't be that normal probability. So there are kind of two ways you can break this tie. Who wants to take the first shot? Amshu. There we go. There we go. We're remembering. So first is time frame. Explain that out for everyone. Yeah, so warming will cause disease before disease can cause warming. You want to take the second one too? You kind of guessed it a little bit earlier. DP? Mm-mm. Probability. Now, this is like probability-ish because it's not about whose impact is better or more probable. It's whose causation is more probable. If there is a 90% chance that warming causes extinction, but only a 1% chance that disease causes warming, then even if disease comes first, maybe we want to take the gamble of just 1% to pretty much solve it 90% by waiting a little bit longer and solving warming first. Does everyone kind of see that logic? Yes. But it only is going to solve 1% of it, so not really, right? That's the whole causation probability argument. And so it's important that if you're caught up in this causation, both teams have equal causation. The two tiebreakers are time frame, probability of causation. This is definitely varsity level. I would say JVers don't get this, even low-level varsity people don't get this, and PFers don't get it at all. So that's something to think about for sure. Some quick theory stuff to talk about. I'm not going to go too much in detail in here, but this is something you need to learn. Because the packet is limited, you cannot add new cards, right? But you are allowed to add analytics. And so novices love to dump weird analytics that come from weird theory arguments that are meant to just take out the entire sheet of paper. They're usually all BS, but their whole strategy is, I make this weird argument. Do you know how to respond to it? No. Is it in the packet? Was it in the block? No. So their coach hasn't talked to them about it. And so they just say, I'll ignore it. And then what happens? Then they lose the round and come back and say, Dr. Thule, I lost on one of these bad theory arguments, and then we have to have a conversation about where to go to the file, how to find the theory responses, and what the basic stuff is. The big ones you'll hear are usually perms, which only can happen on counter plans, but they'll sometimes try to combine it to disadvantages. A perm just says, why can't we do both? Why can't we do the plan of staying up all night and bribe the math teacher so the math teacher gives a good grade? Right? Not really allowed. You can't really perm disadvantages. We have blocks of this. Half the time they're going to swear it's not a perm. They're going to call it a non-intrinsic response, but it's actually an intrinsic perm. And we'll talk all about what those are on counterplans, so don't worry about it now. Another thing you might hear is the term fiat solves the link. So the magic wand of fiat says you get to pretend like the plan will happen. That's a Latin term. It means let it be done. And so you're taking the plan's not happening now. We wave the wand. We debate as if the plan happened. But that wand you can make super, super big. What if we not only wave the wand to say plan happens, but we also wave the wand to bring world peace? Then if I've waved world peace, is there any chance of a Russian nuclear war disadvantage? No, because they've abused fiat and waved beyond the impact. They can also use fiat to try to wave beyond the link. The link says the plan trades off with our ability to focus in, say, China or East Asia pivot. And they say, fine, we will just double our resources, double the diplomats. Now we can do it. Well, that would be fiat abuse. They're using beyond what their powers are, which is just to pretend the plan happens, and they're trying to fiat things outside the plan to erase your strategies. Riders are a more complicated one. Let's not worry about that until you get to varsity. Last big part is double turns. So this is one that is super important. It happens all the frickin' time in novice debate, a double turn. So we talked about what a turn is, right? So you have a link turn, an internal link turn, an impact turn. So sticking to our original formula, we have our plan, which leads to staying up, or actually, not staying up actually, because parent stops you, which means you have no good math score, which means then you have no good GPA, which means then you have no good college, no good life, and we'll leave it at that. Everyone got our basic story. So for each of these, you can say a no link, right? Staying up does not affect your math. Or not staying up or actually hurt your math, right? Rather, it would improve your math rather than decrease your math. I should actually just do it this way. Because if you don't stay up, you get more sleep. Does everyone remember that logic? And so I've turned this one. Novices love to throw lots of turns in there. And so what happens if I also turn this one? If I have a lower college, maybe my life actually improves. Because I go to trade school, I become a plumber. Is the plumber ever going to get replaced by AI? Nope. Not very likely. Not anytime soon anyway. However, that comp scientist you went to school to study become a programmer, what happens when you enter that job market? You find out AI already has your job. And so maybe going to a less college actually improves your life outcomes. Does everyone see that turn? A double turn happens in where you have multiple turns on a sheet of paper. So rather than just turn one component, I've turned multiple components. The reason why that's bad is if you add them up, you end up supporting still the other team. So for example, if I don't stay up all night, my math score goes up now. My math scores went up, now my GPA goes up. My GPA goes up, I'm going to a better college. However, if I go to that better college, what happens? I become the comp sci major. Uh-oh, now I'm replaced by AI. Does everyone see? Because I put two turns on there, I've actually ended up supporting my opponent. And so debaters love to put multiple pieces of turns. Now, it's okay to have lots of turns on one thing. I could have 3 different warrants to why staying up hurt your math score. But I can't turn multiple components at once. And if you do see a double turn, what you have to do is execute it. You cannot just be like, they are contradicting, my job is done, and sit down. That's PF logic right there. You have to concede both double turns and then weigh it as your own contention. I will concede staying up actually will improve my math score, and I'll concede going to a good college actually hurts my life. If I do both, now my plan actually improves my life because it guarantees to become a plumber. And that's good. And then weigh it. And so explicitly conceding the turns as 2 of them and then weighing them must be done. You cannot just say they are contradicting and move on, because the opponent doesn't have to go for both of them until you concede them. So what this basically means, if you're a 2A, or you're answering a DA that way, or if you're neg and you're answering a case advantage, is you can put a turn on one of these components. And then for everything else, it needs to be defense. Right? If you put defense on everything else, plus the 1 turn, you are good. But if you put multiple turns, you have double turned yourself. Has everyone got what a double turn is? Awesome. Here is a complicated slide that it's basically Oops, I've double turned myself. What are tricky ways? Here's how you execute it, first of all. Here's the slide that if you are executing, if you've double turned yourself, how can you still win the debate? Doesn't usually happen if you're AF. You're usually smart enough because you're AF not to do it. It happens more likely when you're neg, and one of the arguments you read on case actually turns and is a double turn with one of your disadvantages. And you're like, crap, I've shot myself in the foot. It doesn't mean the round's lost. There are some very tricky ways to get out of double turns. I've listed them here. For novices, you don't really have to learn this. This is going to be more, once you get to that JV varsity level where you've double turned yourself and you want to kind of still win the round. This is kind of your code on how to do it. Okay, so this is a step-by-step process on how to execute disads. How to execute disads. Cool. So let's go pretty quick. First of all, what you have prepped prior, and so you've written out a uniqueness argument extension, a link argument extension, an internal link argument extension, an impact argument extension. Now, if there's just two cards, it might be there's cards say multiple things. One card might have both uniqueness and link, or might have both internal link and impact, and so you might have two extensions there for one card. Totally okay. And so those have all been prepped before. You've also prepped impact calculus. We've talked about that, magnitude, probability, magnitude, sort of generic, non-comparative, because you don't know their impacts, first before the tournament, and then before the round when you know their case, or even during the rounds when you're comparing their impacts versus your impacts, you're making it actually comparative. So you're adding that impact calculus, the causation stuff that makes it super comparative. From there, so that's all relatively easy. That's what you start with. Second step is you're going to be flowing the 2AC. So they're on the disad, they're saying the speech. Notice how I flowed the 2AC accordingly on my column. I have left room for the overview at the top. Now the 2AC doesn't have an overview, but the neg and subsequent speeches will have an overview, and so you leave an inch or two gap space on your flow, so that way you don't run out of room. And then you want to make sure you're spacing these 2AC arguments apart. And so about 4 or 5 2AC arguments per page max. If they get to number 6 and 7, you flip the page, use the other side. And so do not just put all of your arguments at the very top and scrunch them together, because if you do that, your flow is going to become a disaster. You're going to drop stuff. It's not organized. And so it's super important. Basic novice skill is you put gaps between each of the 2AC arguments. Now, again, as a 1N, as a 1N or a 2N, you don't want to be spending all your time taking notes of what your opponent's saying. You want to quickly diagnose what they're saying, functionally write down what they're saying, and then start prepping your responses. And so if they say a link turn and you already know the warrant is basically a certain type of warrant, you can write that link turn / provocation, link turn / appeasement, something like that. And then that way you put just enough so you can identify what it is on the flow and you know what blocks to pull. You don't have to be writing a very detailed flow for the 2AC because it's meant just to be for you to organize. That's pretty easy. Once we have flowed the 2AC, then you can start prepping. Do not be prepping without flowing because that adds more time to your ultimate speech prep. Next, to identify drops. So you first go through those 4 key components of the DA, uniqueness, link, internal link, and impact, and you look at the 2AC and say, is there one of those that they missed? Is there one of those that they missed? And so in my example, the 2AC forgot to attack the internal link. They gave up the internal link, decided to focus on uniqueness, link, and impact. And so your job is to take the internal link, the argument extension, and you put it in the overview. The overview generally has 2 purposes. One of them is for concessions, and then the others are for impact calculus or sort of round framing summaries. But for concessions, it would go in the overview. This is super, super important for novice because it happens all the time where your opponent forgot to attack your impact. And you're like, great, they forgot the impact, so I'm going to forget the impact too. Because if they didn't answer it, I don't got to answer it. And now you spent your whole time extending a link and uniqueness and maybe even an internal link, and you did all this great job there, but there's 0 impact because you forgot to extend your own impact, so you lose. And so you need to, even if your opponent drops one of those 4 parts, it has to be extended in every speech to keep it alive. And so that's going to go in the overview. And so in my example here, I've moved the internal link argument extension to the overview. After that, it's your burden on the neg to make sure you've extended all parts. After that, then the impact calculus usually goes after the concessions. It just makes more logical sense that way. Extend the link it was dropped. With that, the impact outweighs because. And so you can put impact cal first if you really want, and then say the concession after. But it doesn't really matter too much. But the general norm is usually you'll do concessions first quickly, and then you'll do impact calculus after that. So that's pretty easy. Then you're going to place your argument extensions. So now you're going to look at the flow and see what their arguments are and where the rest of your argument extensions line up. And so here they have 2AC1. They have a non-unique, so they're attacking your uniqueness. Here's where you put your uniqueness argument extension. You look on the flow, they say no link, link extension. They say no impact, impact extension. Note, there are some parts where they're attacking the link in multiple parts. So in this example, 2AC2, they're saying no link. And 2AC3, they're saying link turn. So rather than repeat yourself both times, you pick the first time in the flow where they indict your link. And you put your argument extension there for your link. And so that is what we're going to be doing. It's fine. It takes a second to turn off. Just hit it once. You don't have to sit there 50 minutes. Cool. And so it's going to go here on 2AC2 where they indict the link, but you don't have to do it again on the link turn because you've already extended the link on number 2. After that, you're going to add and write your blocks. And so here where once you have the QLS version of our files, there will be very heavy blocks for these. But early on, you might be having to add your own blocks, write your own analytics, things like that, which is a necessary life skill. And so we might have a pre-written non-unique block. We might have a pre-written answers to link turn block. We might have a pre-written answers to no impact block. And you're going to put these arguments also in the line by line after each one. If there is no block, you're going to have to be writing one in rounds, writing your own sort of analytical rebuttal in PF terms to their argument, and so or frontline. And so this could be carded responses, analytics, argument response resolution. All of that happens. One nice thing to know is most of these blocks will incorporate a space for argument extension in it. And so I won't put the argument extension, but like for example, the answers to non-unique block, the number 1 is going to be extend uniqueness, and that's where your argument extension will go. Number 2 will go from there, more cards, argument card comparisons, things like that. So we've done those steps. Note, I didn't have a block for the no link, and so I might have to write an AT myself, or I like the link extension is good enough to answer the no link. After that, we add our card comparison. So we're going to go through each spot and put card comparison / argument resolution to each one. This part's super helpful. You want to make card comparison usually far more than just read random cards. Now, it's not good just to make lots of bad PF card comparison and have 0 cards. It's also not good just to read a bunch of cards and have 0 card comparison. And so a hefty balance that has good card comparison and you're adding additional cards is very helpful, which is where we come to now. When do we add new cards after this? And so new cards can be helpful if they're adding new warrants or data and to help make your argument stronger. But if the card basically says the exact same thing as a card you've already read, you're just wasting your own time, which is actually bad, not even 0, it's negative, because that time could have been spent elsewhere pressuring the 1AR. Beyond that, new cards, if you choose to read a new card, the AF gets a new answer in the 1AR. So, for example, if the 2AC forgot to attack your impact, they dropped your impact, and you want to say, in the concession, in the overview, they have dropped my impact is now true, they don't get new answers. Right there, that's true. But then if you say, oh, here's another impact card in the negative block, now the 1AR can be like, my opponent read a new card. I get new carded answers. I forgot the answer to that speech, but thankfully I now get to answer it now, and then they can answer it in the 1AR and unbury themselves from that. And so it's super important to think about if it's a drop, not to read new cards on it, but to sort of lock it down, say, this is it, I'm calling it's like calling the bluff or poker, you're making the call, I'm not re-raising, you don't get to raise, we're going to call the pot, see what it is, and so no new cards by you, no new cards by me, I got my 1 card, You may have 1 card or 0 cards, and that's all that can be allowed on that argument. What type of new cards are more helpful than not? So a lot of times you're going to have new cards a lot in uniqueness. That's a very helpful part because uniqueness controls the direction of the link. The other part time you're going to see a lot of new cards sometimes will be on the links. It's very helpful if you have 1 link to read a new link scenario in the block because the 1ERs like to drop them. They might answer your original link but drop your new link, and now you're still good because you have this new link. Reading new impact scenarios can be very dangerous. Now, they're helpful if they're causation arguments for impact calculus, but if all of a sudden no one's talking about China war and you decide to read a China war argument in the 1NR, the 1ER can get up and say, everything else no longer matters. They've said China war. I'm going to impact turn that and say China war good for the next 3 minutes and just read card after card after card after card. And then as a 2NR, you start crying because the debate just had a restart. And so you did that to yourself by reading a new impact scenario. They got new responses. They got to pivot the debate to that and kind of ruin your day. So that's basically it for disad. Once you've set all those steps up, you get up and read. You start with your overview. You then go, they say non-unique, but read your answers. They say no link, but read your answers. They say link turn, but your answers. They say no impact, but your answers. Bam, speech is done, 4 minutes. Does everyone kind of see how that goes? Awesome.